So I'm Rachel from Thrive, and I am introducing Chris to talk about a really interesting topic today of the LGBT older experience. And Chris has some fantastic knowledge on this topic, and I know that this is going to be a really insightful session. So please get involved. If you're watching back, leave some comments and stay engaged with us. And without further ado, I will hand over to Chris to take it away.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Chris Mullens. I'm just trying to find the right icon. Bear with me. Yeah, so I'm Chris Mullens. I'm originally from Glasgow, so apologies for the accent. If you do need me to slow down, please tell me. I'll be more than happy to do that. I'm 64, identify as a gay male, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself before I go into the topic. I was bullied at school because I was gay, although I hadn't come out myself and didn't realise it. I went into the airline industry, which was a good industry to go into if you were a gay man. But unfortunately, I came out at a time when the AIDS epidemic hit, and that had a massive impact on myself and my peers. I trained to be a counsellor after a few things in my life that caused issues. I then moved into human factors training in the airline industry. I then got a PGC, took voluntary redundancy, and became self-employed in 2009. I originally wanted to do life coaching, but when I realised I wasn't motivated or positive enough, it was probably a good idea to move into other areas. I'm now a partner with Thrive, and I also deliver mental health first aid and suicide awareness training, and also some safeguarding training as well. So that's my background. What I would like to say before we begin, I want everyone to know that this is a safe space. Please feel free to use it as you would like. Also, please feel to leave or opt out if you feel uncomfortable with anything. I'm not planning on putting anything that could be deliberately triggering, but there may be something that may trigger somebody. So please make sure you look after yourself and your own self-care. I would like us to respect each other's views and opinions because they may vary. It's not Brexit. We don't need to fall out with each other. We can agree to disagree. And I do also need to make it clear I'm not a spokesperson for the LGBT community or the LGBT plus older community or even LGBT male community. I'm a member of that community. I'm expressing some views here that some of my peers have discussed with me and they'd like me to put forward, but they're not all necessarily my views. And I want to be very clear, I'm not a spokesperson. A little bit of a history lesson, really. How I got into wanting to deliver this today. I was given a course to deliver, not by this organisation, but another one in an elderly care home. And I realised that it didn't have much reality for people that was 50 plus because there was a lot of assumptions that there would be acceptance there. And while I realised there would be acceptance perhaps with some of the staff, there wouldn't necessarily be acceptance among the other residents. And it dawned on me that the person concerned, people going into a care home, is that they would actually be going into the very environment that put them in the closet in the first place. And that's why I'm here today. How it compares with neurodiversity, and I think Rachel's referred to this in her previous webinar, is that I think as LGBT plus people and neurodivergent people, we suffer from a lot of the same or prejudices. We have judgment, we have prejudice, we have stereotypes, we have negative media coverage, and we might also suffer from rejection from family members because of the lack of understanding about how we are. And I think also it's important that to be aware that within the gay community, we are a very diverse community. And while that diversity brings a lot of support, it can also bring a lot of issues as well. And maybe in some way, because I'm focusing on an older perspective, there's maybe an element of the elephant in the room in here, because there can be an assumption we're a very collective community, but there's also a situation where some older people, they may not always feel as part of that community as they did when they were younger. And that's not a criticism, that's just an observation. And we're probably one of the first generations who've lived as out gay people en masse. And now we didn't really expect old age to creep up on us, and it has done. And it's kind of how we process that and how we understand and make sense of the community as it develops. So when I say many of our younger members have little knowledge of what it was like for us, I'm not saying that in a, oh, they don't know what it's like sort of thing. I'm saying it more from, I'm very conscious that a lot of my younger friends, they don't, they have no idea what it was like in the past. And it's not that, oh my God, we had it hard. It's just that, you know, if you come from a minority group, quite often you've got a collective history. We don't teach that collective history in schools, and unless people go out of the way to find out about that collective history, they're not going to know about it. So hopefully this will really raise awareness. Because of the topics I'll be talking about, it's not going to be as positive as our presentation, but I hope it's so maybe a bit sober, but hopefully it will raise some awareness and give you plenty of opportunity to ask questions. I'm quite open to asking questions as we go through the presentation, but in general, we tend to keep them to the end, but we'll see how we go on as we go along. I'll just have a quick look here how we're doing. So let's just get back to the presentation. Okay, so what happened during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, and I'll discuss more about that in a moment. Pink triangle, a lot of people, a younger friend, didn't know what it was. And what is concentration camps, Jewish people would wear the pink triangle, and various presented. I think the brown one was for the Gypsy community, Romani community, and the red one was for communists. So there was a variety of ones, but the pink one was to signify gay people, specifically gay men. And one of the other things about the Nazi persecution and the Holocaust was when the war ended, people were repatriated, I don't want to say that, or were given compensation or were allowed to go back and live their lives. A lot of gay men who were in prison remained in prison, and the reason they remained in prison was because homosexuality, as it was seen then, was known as a criminal act and was still treated as such. So forgive me if I keep using homosexuality instead of LGBTQ plus all the time. It's just because this is a focus on a lot of the male side of it, because we're more visible and there were more laws against us because of that. Okay, gay liberation in the UK. In the 60s, the awareness was growing, and I'll talk a bit more about the law change in a moment. But gay liberation, as it was known now, the Gay Liberation Front, was founded in the London School of Economics in 1970. And they were one of the first people to reclaim the pink triangle as a badge to be worn, to let people know that you were of that community. And although we didn't actually call it LGBTQ plus then, it was very much it was known as the gay community, then it became the lesbian gay, then it became the lesbian, gay, bi, and then trans community, and then queer came on, and then the plus came on to bring in other members who felt they belonged or sat under that umbrella. So pink triangle began to be used quite a lot, and it was very prolific in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Sadly, I tend not to see it so much around now. And like I say, there's a lot of people within and without our community aren't aware of what it signifies. And like I say, it's got quite a poignant story about it. Victorian era, we've always been around. We've never been always visible, but the gay community have always been around. And there's a picture of two ladies there having a dance with each other, which is lovely to see. And the famous Oscar Wilde, who was blackmailed and prosecuted for his homosexuality, and where he was very unusual for his time, he was very out, as we would say, at a time when people weren't, and very flamboyant as well, and also very unapologetic. And I think that's one of the difficulties when people of my generation came out. It was still very difficult. You know, I came from a Catholic background, and my family would not have taken well to me becoming part of that community. So it was still very difficult. And we'll say more about that as I go on. Okay. 1921, Parliament considered changing the Above Act to make it legal for women to engage in sex acts. However, this came into force because the politicians at the time believed that bringing lesbian tendencies into the limelight would cause more girls to become attracted to the same sex. So as a result, lesbians became, or gay women became, invisible. The upside of that was it was very difficult, well nigh impossible, to prosecute a woman for any sexual act. it wasn't so for men. And as a result, there was a lot of persecution, prosecution, and a lot of blackmailing went on as well. Okay, so in the 60s, they began to become a lot more enlightened, and homosexuality was legalized for men. Again, it wasn't recognized as women. And back in the Victorian times, I think when they discussed it with Queen Victoria, she actually said, ladies don't do that sort of thing. So there was never really any legislation to either acknowledge that women indulged in relationships with each other, but also it was off the radar. So I don't know if anybody knows what year we had the decriminalisation. Anybody know? Okay then. It was 1967. I think Rachel mentioned in her presentation that she is a massive film buff. I'm a massive Eurovision fan. 1967 was the year. And my significance that year was that I wanted to watch Eurovision, and my mum and dad thought I was too young and they sent me to bed. And I never forgave them because we won that year. That was probably a sign that I might have been leaning towards the gay community, because it's always had a bit of a gay following. So that was that. So it became legal for men 21 plus, no mention of women. And the discrimination here is that heterosexual age of consent was actually 16 at the time. And it was very strange restrictions to this law. It had to be two consenting males. And if they were indulging in activity in a house that other people were in, the other people technically had to agree to that activity taking place. Gay men still couldn't go into hotels and book a double room together. So there was so much discrimination still there. Although the practice was now decriminalised, it did criminalise anyone else underneath the age of consent. And obviously the disparity there of 5 years between heterosexuals and people from the community. Okay, so coming out, it was a phrase that was originally used in the 20th century in reference to women attending a debutante ball, and I think they held them well into the reign of the previous queen. I think they've now disappeared, but it was about young ladies coming out into society and joining that level of society and finding a husband. In past times, the word closet meant bedroom. So sexuality remained in there. So we talked about people coming out of the closet. So that's where the expression coming out came from. And the reason that there's a picture of Diana Ross in there, in 1980, she brought out an album called Diana, and she had a massive hit from it called Upside Down. But also at the time as well, she brought another song out that was from the album called I'm Coming Out. And a lot of gay people related to that. She's never actually referenced it as being related to the gay community. It was more about someone coming out well. But there was definitely references that a lot of gay people, LGBT plus people, related to at the time. And also she's a bit of a gay icon for gay men anyway. It was also her birthday yesterday. Okay, Stonewall. We all hear about Stonewall as a movement for change in the UK for the LGBT plus community. However, not many people know what it actually was all about. And what happened in 1969, there was a bar called Stonewall, and there was a place in America called Greenwich Village, and it was where all the cabin crew used to stay, and also all the most people from the gay community, because it was affordable and it was quite a funky sort of area. I have actually been there. They've actually got a street named after me, Christopher Street. I don't think they named it after me, but you get what I'm talking about. Anyway, the police had been harassing gay people for a long time, historically, raiding the bars and stuff. And on this night, they pushed the envelope a little bit, and a lot of the community fought back. There is a school of thought there might have been some sensitivity around the fact that a gay icon called Judy Garland, who was an actress mainly known for being in The Wizard of Oz, she died in London having a drug overdose, possibly accidental, that day. There's no direct proof that there was anything to do with that, but there is a school of thought that there was a sense into the gay community on that evening. Whatever happened anyway, it was a catalyst, and these riots went on for days, and they made worldwide news. You can see the way the police are there, obviously very anti-gay. What I find quite amusing about that is the three police in moustaches. In the late 70s, early 80s, that became very much a typical look of a gay man, and it was known as the clone look. So I find it quite funny. You've got three men arresting an LGBT person, and they actually look like people who are about to be gay icons further down the line. Coming back here to the UK and in the world in general, there's a picture there of Mark Bolan, who is no longer with us. He was in a car crash and died several years ago. He was a singer in the very early 70s in the UK, fronted a band called T-Rex, and he was out as being bisexual. And at the time, that was really racy. At the same time, David Bowie was out as bisexual. Elton John was in the closet. He later on in the 70s had a duet with Kiki Dee, who was a gay woman, but she wasn't out at the time. But what was happening was a lot of people in the music industry, the film industry, were coming out, and it became actually quite fashionable, certainly in certain circles, to basically say that you are of the LGBT community and you were out. It became quite cool. We became more visible, and it looked like acceptance was on the way for us, which was lovely. I still hadn't come out at this point personally. It was the late 70s, but I was definitely in that direction. And of course, what happened? AIDS came along. And that allowed a lot of prejudice to rise to the surface. And I don't know if any of you watched the programme that was on the other night, sorry, about George Michael. And it was about how he had to come out because he was caught with his pants down, for want of a better expression. But it was also tracing back to when he first became famous and how it was very difficult for someone to come out because of everybody equated AIDS with gay people. And the media has got a lot to answer for that. And what happened was people like himself, it wouldn't do their careers any good to come out. So for a long time, he remained in the closet. Okay, if you want to do any research on it, you can go into government timelines and reflect the AIDS epidemic rather. 1981 is when we first heard about it. I personally had come out in 1980 and was having a great time. And then there was reports in New York about gay men developing this autoimmune system. It was originally known as HTLV3, then transferred into HIV and AIDS. And then eventually, as we progressed, we made the distinction between AIDS and HIV. HIV was the virus that caused AIDS, but not everyone developed AIDS into the level that was death, although most people did. And some people were actually able to control it. Unfortunately, at that time, AIDS was a death sentence. It stands for autoimmune deficiency syndrome, and it equated with a death sentence. There was no cure. There was no control. It wasn't too well into the late 90s that medication became such that people with HIV could actually be controlled. And now, fortunately, although there isn't a cure for it, people who have HIV can take medication which gives them what we call a low viral load. That means that the virus is undetectable, and it means they're unable to pass the virus on to people so long as they keep taking the meds. All good day people were aged 50 and 70 in 1980. When HIV came along, it was the baby boomers that was aged 16 to 34 that were the ones who were more likely to get it because they were more sexually active, and that was the peak of the AIDS epidemic. It created massive prejudice, detrimental changes in the law. Margaret Thatcher brought out a law called Section 28, and what that meant was that you were not allowed to promote gay lifestyles in schools as a normal lifestyle. And you can imagine the damage that would do for future generations of young people, because what it was basically saying is our lifestyle was wrong and it wasn't one we should lean towards or aspire to, and it shouldn't be treated as equal to those in the heterosexual community. So it was a very damaging law, Section 28. There became a lot of violent attacks towards the community, especially towards gay men. There was a lot of fear around from within the community and without. What happened was you had people not wanting to drink out the same cup as them, people not knowing how it could be spread. And it wasn't until I think about 83 when they isolated the virus, we began to see how it was spread. And the medical community had to liaise very much with gay men who primarily were the people who caught this condition because they didn't understand about sexual practices that could pass this on. So it took us a long time to realise that although it could be found in saliva and teardrops, it could only really be passed on through sexual fluid, semen or blood. A fear around before we knew how it was transmitted. Very frightening to think if you were to have a liaison with somebody, it could lead to death in the end. Very horrible death. I knew people who suffered and died, and you don't see many of them around now because the medication is so good. But eventually people looked at skeletons. They actually looked at the people you saw coming out of Elson because the immune system just completely shut down. The gentleman in the picture, yeah, there is an actor from the 50s called Rock Hudson, very famous, and you can see also a very good looking man there as well. He died of HIV and got some horrific press coverage at the time. Detrimental press coverage. I live in the Manchester area, and at the time, the Chief of Police, James Anderton, said that we were all, what was the expression now, swirling in a cesspit of our own making. What was quite ironic, it turned out his daughter was a cesspit swirler herself. His daughter came out, and I think it was quite good how she handled it. She just said, "I'll pay no attention to him," and the rest of us do, or words to that effect. Okay. LGBT, had been covered before. It started off as lesbian, gay, bi, and trans. Might not always find it in records. And like I say, reminder there, our gender wasn't always acknowledged before the 60s. And there's a picture there, statue of Alan Turing, who cracked the Enigma code but was prosecuted for being gay and ultimately took his own life. This is the newer flag, where insertions have been made to make the community wider. Originally, the rainbow flag was there to represent the gay community, and the idea behind it was the rainbow covered all. However, as we've moved on, there's been a movement towards being more specific about the diversity that we bring in. However, one of the things about LGBT people is how we've moved on in the community, and a lot of people, I've realized a lot of people of my community, they either don't understand a lot of this and they're not comfortable with it. Because what's happened is, when I was younger, people of my generation were mixed in the gay community, literally in the community. We went out to the bars and the clubs, and they were the only places we could go and be visible. Things have leveled out a lot more in a good way, but also we've lost a little bit of community in the sense that a lot of people meet through the apps and people congregate through Facebook and social media and stuff. So we don't maybe have the connections. And if we equate our aging to other people, as we get older, we get less visible, we get less inclined to go out. A heterosexual person probably would not want to go to a trendy nightclub or something nowadays, and I certainly wouldn't. But if I go to a gay bar, most of them have got loud music, a lot of noise. I don't want to go to places like that anymore. So I think as we get older, our community, we probably relate more to the heterosexual community as we become more defined by our ailments and various other issues and our politics. However, the community's moved on, and some of our community haven't always necessarily moved on with the movement. And I have to own the fact that I personally am not comfortable with the word queer. I know it was reclaimed. It still doesn't sit with me because it was a very offensive word in its day. And although reclamation is meant to have taken the power from it, it hasn't for me and for a lot of people I'm close to and friendly with and of my generation. And that's where the diversity within the situation in the elephant room can come out, because we're not always in agreement with our younger members. But I think it's good to be able to disagree and have a discussion, a debate, and we can all learn from each other. And like it is with neurodiversity, it's about celebrating that difference and agreeing that we're all human and we all have different ways of how we want to live our life. The whole point of this is putting down the fact that this generation are now going into elderly care facilities. What's going to be happening is they're going to be among the people who put them in the closet in the first place. So a lot of the people in those care homes are going to be homes that they have for years. And I think with a lot of minority groups, I think one of the problems we have is when we move into a realm where people are told what they should and shouldn't say, it pushes a lot of, the advantage is people are saying things that are not offensive. There's a lot of people who still feel who are offensive, and they still hold those prejudices and they're still there, and they'll be nice to your face and the prejudice comes out when your back's turned. And I know from people that's went into elderly care, both people who work there and people who have moved into care have experienced that. So the revisiting the prejudice and misunderstanding that they had to escape from when they were younger. My generation tended not to have the option of having children. The law was very much against us adopting children or fostering children, and we hadn't really been clever enough to think of the alternative methods of allowing us to have a family of our own. So we don't have kids to stand up for them like a heterosexual person might have going into the care. They may be distanced from their own community, both physically, theoretically, emotionally, socially. And they might actually be in situations with staff who are actually intolerant and even violent. And there have been reports that there have been violence towards people of the community specifically because of their sexuality and gender identity from staff. And I think some of those staff particularly have got a religious leaning that has them against LGBT plus people. Great. Attitudes and laws have improved enormously. Thankfully, we've moved on, and it's a brilliant place, or much better, much more improved place for young people, gay people to go out. However, having said that, it's not always the case around the world. We only need to look at places like Russia, where people are persecuted for being gay, LGBT plus, etc., and some countries it's still the death penalty. Whereas, fortunately, certainly on the surface and in the law, we're much more supported. However, the prejudice is still there. Some people are still affected by the ramifications. People have had criminal convictions for sexual activity that they wouldn't have had now. A lot of them have suffered from blackmailing. A lot of them have had beatings and they've not felt able to go to the police about it. A lot of them have been raped and not felt able to go to the police about it. And not everyone is able to access the apps and connections. And that's not just for gay people, LGBT people, that's for heterosexual people as well. And I think one of the points I'm trying to cross is it's for my generation and older, we've actually come full circle, whether we like it or not. And we're back in the heterosexual community, whether we like it or not. Come to the end of the presentation, I would certainly welcome any questions from you and challenges as well. So feel free to have a go.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm monitoring the chat box to see if anyone does want to ask any questions. We haven't had any throughout the webinar, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to say how insightful this webinar has been today. I'm an LGBT person myself, and yet I think that it is so important to revisit the history and understand, like you say, that there are points that are very sobering, but are nonetheless important to remember. And one of my favorite things you brought up is the fact that now with HIV, if you're taking your medication, it can be undetectable and then untransmissible, which lots of people don't realize. So some amazing bits of information today. And thank you for being comfortable to share your story as well.
Yeah, I think what's strange is it's took me a long time to get here. I probably wouldn't have been comfortable in this conversation up until about 20 years ago. Since then, it's who I am, it's part of me, and I'm very clear that I'm very comfortable in my own skin with regard to it. But I think it's important that, I think one thing I noticed, I'm not sure what it's like for other people in the community, but certainly as a gay man of my generation, we tended to hang about with people of our own age. And I always remember going out, of all places, in Paris with a friend. We were in a gay restaurant and there was a group of people and I went, oh, look, I said, it's a gay family. I said, you've got the grandparents, you've got the mum and dad, and then you get the kids. And what it was a group of gay men all out together, but they were from the late teens right to the 70s. And I thought, how beautiful is that? Because we didn't have that here.
Yeah.
And that has changed now because I've got a group of friends and the youngest is 29 and the oldest is 66 and I'm 64. So right across that gamut, we have got that age range, and the discussions we can have are amazing because we all come to look at it at a different perspective and we're educating each other.
Absolutely, you're right. And it's remembering that we're not one homogenous group. There's just as much diversity within the LGBT community as there is in the heterosexual community, and to bring it full circle, as there is with neurodiversity as well. So I think now's probably a good time for us to wrap up. Thank you so much again, Chris, for being here today to share your story. For those who are attending today or watching back, we do these lunch and learns every month on all sorts of different topics that our fantastic instructor partners bring to the table. So we hope to see you at another lunch and learn soon. And thank you for being with us. Thank you again, Chris.
Thank you very much, everyone.